Hello and welcome to our special edition of Tech That Talks, where I have the pleasure of speaking alongside the experts of various focal points of data privacy legislations that will come together today with one goal, which is to define the data privacy trends for 2022 and what to watch out for within your company, especially with future-looking technologies. First, I'd like to begin today's panel by thanking Jody Daniels from Red Clover Advisors, which provides operational privacy support for companies, Sharon Analik from Privacy Panacea, a boutique firm specializing in data privacy consultations, and Caroline McCaffrey from ClearOps. So let's take a topic that everybody is talking about today, the metaverse. The metaverse, which will merge physical reality with the digital world by way of virtual reality, augmented reality, and the internet is coming. But the question is, and the question that everyone's asking themselves is, are we ready, especially from a data privacy perspective? Technology is growing more and more sophisticated with each passing year. The ways of collecting data that technology can power our lives are near infinite. And who would have ever thought that one day we'd be able to walk into a grocery store, skip the checkout line, and still pay for our goods? Yet here we are, the day has arrived, and thanks to sophisticated camera technologies, it can trace our every move. But just how is the data being collected, and what can we do about it? Data will continue to be produced, for example, when users spend money to customize their avatars in the online world and in the metaverse. And as people increase their digital footprint online and in the metaverse specifically, and undergo more immersive experiences, people are going to create greater volumes of data, and this will then be sold to third parties. So this raises the question, what can we do to protect this data privacy, and who will be responsible for storing this, handling it, and safeguarding this? Today, we're going to talk about these topics and more in GDPR in general, so please bring all of your questions toward the end of the panel, and as always, we'll get to them. So let's begin. Sharon, perhaps you can share with us some of the opening topics that we're going to be talking about today. I'd like to get a bigger understanding where data privacy legislations are in the US, and which developments are we witnessing for companies in 2022?
Great question. It's a really exciting time to be in privacy. You know, I've been in it for 20 years and every year has been an exciting time to be in privacy. But right now we really see this explosion in legislation and both legislation and enforcement. So in the US, we now have 4 states that have privacy laws. And when I say privacy laws, I mean beyond what we already had, which was the breach notification laws in each of the states, but really privacy laws governing the collection and use of, for the most part, consumer data and providing rights to individuals. So California, as always, started us off. California likes to be the trendsetter in privacy laws with not just one, but then of course the amended, the first CCPA and then CPRA as well, which will go into effect in January. Virginia with the CDPA, providing some broader applicability. Colorado has the CPA, and the most recent member to the party has been Utah with the UCPA signed into law last month, relating to consumer data. And I think we see more state laws moving through the state houses, and we will definitely see more to come, which is very reminiscent of what occurred with breach notification laws, where California was the first state to start, a few others trickled in, and now we see breach notification laws throughout the country. What I would say is similar about the state privacy laws that we're seeing so far. They all have a similar approach. The theme is definitely granting individuals more rights to their data, to access their data, delete it, receive portable versions, opt out of the sale, which mirrors what we've seen outside of the US. So I think we have state laws that are now really looking to the EU framework and bringing those into individuals in the US. There are a couple of really interesting things to look for in this year. So with the passage of CPRA in California, a new privacy agency was established, the California Privacy Protection Agency, FCPPA, for those of you who are keeping track of the alphabet soup in the privacy world. And this agency is the first one that is tasked with implementing and enforcing the law. So there are a lot of eyes on California. There's a very experienced executive director and a 5-member board, and I expect that we will see a lot in the coming year, both in soliciting input and action from that group.
Nope. Data. Do you think that there's being enough done in regards to this, and especially, which we're going to get into a little bit more with future-looking technologies, are we really following GDPR like in Europe, in the US, and are we on the, so to say, right track? Or do you think that individuals and companies, you know, when they come to you for data privacy advice, that they don't really see that that's maybe following up as fast as legislation is being rolled out?
Well, definitely it's the case that legislation is not moving as quickly as technology. That is true in every sphere. You know, it's interesting. I think that I believe that it makes sense for individuals to have the ability and the right to know what is happening with the data that is being collected about them and what uses are in place. And I believe it makes sense for individuals to have some say in that. And in the US, the default used to be that it was almost a finders keepers mentality on data. If a company collected it in some way, they were able to use it unless there was a specific, usually sector specific law such as HIPAA or GLBA that prevented them from doing so. And the default outside the US has been just the opposite. Right? That data about an individual belongs to that individual, regardless of who is holding it at the moment. And as a result, individuals have more rights to it. And I think that as companies are becoming more global, their footprints are becoming more global, even if they are located, you know, in one state in the US, they may have users or consumers or customers all around the world. And many companies and individuals, we all pivoted to a more online environment, right, over the last few years when we were limited from where we could physically go. And so that has opened up the world to everyone and has also brought in the applicability of so many different jurisdictions' laws. So I think it makes sense that the US is sort of kicking and screaming, but moving into an approach that is more similar to the EU and to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Sharon. And talking about this approach for let's say international waters. So as you said, globalization is happening. With globalization comes great things. Obviously, we have companies that are based in California or based in Virginia, Colorado. They also have clients, you know, doing their e-commerce also coming from different states, also coming from different countries. And when we look on the global scale of where data privacy is at currently, we have some countries that are stricter than others. What kind of advice, I don't know, anyone else can also chime in, but what kind of advice would you have for companies who come and say, hey, we're actually sitting with our headquarters in California, but we do have a large part of our client base coming from the EU, let's say, or states where there's just not so much of a decked out privacy framework. What can companies do there? Should they adhere to possibly a more stricter legislation? Should they have a more thorough privacy policy within their company? But then again, there's also maybe the fear that companies or the clients are not really going to even go through the privacy policy. What's some advice that you can give us?
So I can tell you that question comes up with every one of our clients, and I think every company out there is grappling with this. The options really are, do we try to, and I say try as opposed to do we try to compartmentalize our data and our operations by jurisdiction, and then only apply the relevant jurisdictional laws to that data or those operations, which would mean the upside, I guess, if you will, one side of that is that then you don't provide more rights to certain individuals that wouldn't otherwise have those rights, right? Because different jurisdictions allow different things. But operationally, it's very challenging to do that behind the scenes. So this isn't about should we have one privacy policy or one global one or one for every jurisdiction. It's really about the operational piece of it. And that's what we often tell companies is forget about the privacy laws for a moment in this. We can draft whatever you need and decide you want, but really what you should be looking at is on the business side, operationally, is this really doable for your business? Will it create, will compartmentalizing the data by jurisdiction, will that take away from your ultimate business goals, which are maybe to create larger data sets and learn from your data or have some cross-border transfer because operationally that's easier and better for your business? And if that's the case, then it's maybe the answer here is to give everyone, choose the most applicable restrictive regulation to apply to all of your consumers or customers and to all of your data in order to ease the operational burden.
And just if I may jump in, I was going to add, in addition to everything, Sharon, that you just described, if Jody's sitting in Atlanta, Georgia, I have no rights, I have nothing, but I think I should have some. And so in addition to not only just what makes sense operationally for the company to make this whole thing work, because it can be really challenging to figure out, well, Jody's in Georgia and Susie's in California and Fred's in Virginia, and systems aren't really set up like that. But also customers don't know the nuances of these laws. They just think it should be this way. The same is true for any smaller company. A smaller company in the United States might not technically have to comply. Internationally, it might need to, but locally here in the US, we try and treat our small businesses, and there's floors and minimums. But if Jody now has moved to California and I have rights and I exercise them at a large company, I don't know that that doesn't apply to the small B2C e-commerce company I just went to. I just think it applies. And so now you have actually a sense of confusion, and that can really damage and tarnish potentially your brand and all the marketing that you've done. And on a B2B side, it makes a massive impact from an investment perspective or an M&A transaction. We work with a lot of private equity companies, and we're finding more and more of them are looking at how are you managing the privacy and security programs. And when the small company wants that investment or sale, or wants to work with the big company, guess what those people say? You have to play by the rules. They don't say, you know what, you're too small, that's okay. No, they say, here's how you have to do it. And so in conjunction with what you've just described, Sharon, operationally, it ends up making a lot of sense. There might be some interesting nuances, right? There's not a cross-border thing from California to Virginia, but when you're dealing with individual rights, maybe you choose to offer them to everybody, and you build a program even if you're technically too small here in the United States, because your customer and investor base cares.
Just to add something to that, I mean, especially I've spoken with a lot of VC firms and private equity firms, obviously from our company, as it grows. And also you as a company, you think you're going to grow. Which company says we're going to stop and being a small SME and call it a day? That's it. We don't want any clients abroad. No, we want clients only in California. That's not reality. And so the problem as well is that as soon as your technology starts developing and your product starts getting more complicated per se as well, it's really hard to catch up. And it's like, and that's where the whole entire concept of privacy by design comes in. And that also obviously tunes into the more operational aspect. I don't know if anyone would also like to add something to our viewers who are listening. Privacy by design comes into play a lot. It's a question we get asked a lot. What's the most important operational aspect of a privacy strategy for a company that plays into this privacy by design?
I mean, I would jump in because literally my company's name is Clear Operations for Privacy and Security, Clear Ops. That's what it stands for. And we started with the belief and premise that businesses were built, especially particularly in the United States, but most businesses were built with a data collection strategy that is no longer applicable. And so in order for them to get organizationally ready for the regulatory requirements that they have to comply with, they have to go back and change their processes, right? And that's very, very difficult to do. And that's exactly what your question is. You can start from scratch with privacy by design. That is a lot easier than being an 8 or 10-year-old company or older and going back and saying, where is everything and how do I treat it now? And then what do I need to do? Where are the gaps so that I can get to where I should be? It takes a lot of effort, and it's very expensive, frankly. So I think when you talk about privacy by design, there are several core principles to privacy by design. And but the concept of it is really just that you are operating with privacy in mind in every aspect of the business. So whether that's marketing, whether it's sales, whether it's product building, you're thinking about data privacy in every single component. I'll stop there, but because I'm sure Sharon or Jody have some things to say.
Yeah, I was going to share, there was a company recently and they didn't include a privacy and security review until literally the very end. And they really came to those teams for the rubber stamp. They didn't really get the rubber stamp they wanted. They proceeded anyways. And then there ended up being a security issue and they had to pull the whole project. Had the privacy and security teams worked in conjunction with this new product and technology at the beginning, they could have mitigated what those flaws and risks might have been and not needed to have pulled the overall project. I see that time and time again. And what I always say is, just like companies think about, well, how many people do I need? And how much money will this cost? And what contract do I need? And what technology do I need? Those are common questions. You never hear anyone say, you know what, I can do this project for free, and that's going to be great. Or I can do this project with no humans. They always are asking these questions. As a result, privacy needs to just be one more of those pieces at the beginning.
I completely agree, Jody. And finding ways, that's one of the pieces of advice that we often give to companies, is that find the existing processes already at the company instead of trying to create new ones for privacy and security review, which, you know, folks can be resistant to adding additional what they see as hurdles. What are the existing processes? Because all companies have them, right? Not everyone can sign a contract. There is someone that needs to review it. There's someone that needs to okay it. So there are already gatekeeping spots in the process. Find a way to incorporate privacy and security review into those so that it doesn't seem like such an additional lift or hurdle, but just becomes part of the mentality of someone planning and executing on a project or a business partnership.
And this also plays into the concept of user trust and what we were saying earlier. If companies are not putting out transparently what they're doing as well within their customer base, that's probably going to also destroy user trust. And that's also another large aspect why companies are saying, okay, privacy by design, let's start from the beginning. You don't want to wait, or a company should not wait until there's been a data breach or until there's been a problem and they're in the news, and then go back and say, okay, let's look at our operations, let's look at where we're collecting data, how much third-party data are collecting, what are we doing with this data, and then going in. Which brings me to a general question that I think is very important for our users to hear. What can users and companies do in order to fine-tune that privacy strategy already from the beginning? So we're talking a lot about looking at the operational perspectives. Should companies sit down and say, okay, where are we collecting user data? Is this even relevant for us as a company?
I'll jump in. I'm sure every one of us has a thought on this. So there are a couple of thoughts I have on that. One is, you can't protect what you don't know you have. So first things first, you need to know what you have, where it comes from, what's the data life cycle, where and how do you get information, what data fields are there, is it protected, where is it stored, who has access to it, what are the uses along the way, right? As we think of sort of the data use, the data life cycle. The part that not as many companies think about, when do we get rid of it? How do we destroy it? Or delete it. So I think that's that's one piece. And then the other is, I think it's important for where I've seen privacy thinking mature over the last few years is companies that try to align their privacy strategy with their business strategy. So thinking about what are their business goals, right? What are the most companies have a dashboard, and these are the metrics that they're trying to reach. So developing and aligning a privacy strategy that enables and protects the most important things, most important being what that business decides are the most important things, I think is much more of a pathway to success. So assessing your company's current privacy maturity, setting some goals about where you want to be based on where the business goals are, and then building a privacy roadmap to get yourself there helps to incorporate all of the different stakeholders, get buy-in, be able to plan, as Jody was mentioning earlier, right? No one says, I'm just going to do a project for no money and no people, right? There's planning. And so sometimes you need to plan ahead for the money you'll need, the people you'll need, which partnerships. And so this provides that pathway in the same way that business units tend to do that, and to lay out their roadmaps so that the business knows how to best support it. And I think privacy is more successful inside companies when they think in some ways like the business and operate like the business.
Yeah, I would agree. And I mean, it comes from the top, I think, is what you're saying, Sharon. And I totally agree with that. I also I would love, I mean, this is maybe a little bit optimistic on my side, but I'd love for companies to get away from this whole privacy as a cost mentality and start thinking of it as part of the value of the business. Maybe it's a brand differentiator or something along those lines, but only if there's real action behind that sort of talk. But I definitely think where we have ended up, especially if you look at the numbers of people concerned about their privacy, it is something that businesses should be saying, we care about data privacy, and this is important to us, and that's why you should work with us or use our services or whatever it is.
I would also offer that a lot of times people, when they think about data, focus from a security lens, and they're very focused on where is it stored and protection, and very important to do that. The privacy side, as Sharon alluded to, is we really need to understand the use cycle, because that comes into play everywhere. That fuels our privacy notice. It helps determine, are there any special exemptions in individual rights? It helps us think through not just the compliance baseline, but what else a customer might be thinking. Is it okay to use that data? And we really like to help companies understand it's the process, it's the business process. Is it email marketing? Is it the user sign up? Think about how data from a process perspective, not just a location perspective. And then we'll be able to infuse that use and sharing elements that have law requirements, and we want to check those boxes, and again, can match it up to customer expectations. And when we blend all of that together, each new time we're going to do something new, Caroline, you mentioned, right? Think about the existing processes in a company. Well, part of that existing processes, is this a change request? Is this new? And then you can also say, oh, wait, those are like little privacy flags that I need up on top that have the triggers to keep going down and asking the appropriate questions.
Thank you so much, Jody. I'd like to take a moment to answer one of our questions from one of our viewers, Scott. The question is, what are some key steps in reaching out to customers of an organization that had a data breach? I don't know who would feel comfortable in answering that, but go ahead.
I mean, I'm happy to jump in there. Okay, so I mean, the first thing that that comes to mind when there's a data breach, if it's a confirmed data breach, which I say that because when there's a first indication of a data breach within the company, certainly you want to think about getting your lawyers involved. Certainly you want to think about forensics. Certainly you want to think about other legal requirements, regulatory requirements. But this question says, reaching out to customers of the organization that I'm going to say confirmed data breach. So we've gotten through all that. I think I used to always recommend to the companies I worked for that marketing have already in its toolbox some pre-written ways to address a data breach with the customers, whether it was having explored the different channels of communication with the customers, whether that be email or direct phone calls or however it is. As the attorney for the company, of course, there may be contractual obligations on how to communicate with customers. So you want to make sure that that's why I'm saying you want to already have that organized, because the last thing you want to be doing is trying to look at thousands of customer contracts to see if there's specific emails that you should be using for a notification of a data breach. And then you also want to, the reason you want to think about it beforehand is because you want to work with your marketing department in how that communication should be handled. Oftentimes, again, the contracts will state certain things like you need to give a full recount of the data breach and what information had been disclosed or unauthorized and gotten out there. And there may be implications for that. So you want to make sure that you are going through the contracts, getting your language and the process of the notification thought about beforehand. If you're already in the data breach, then you're just scrambling to do all those things.
Well, Scott, I hope that answered your question. Thanks so much, Caroline. Before we move on to the metaverse and more forward-looking technologies, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the role of privacy policy. So a lot of customers come to us as a company and say, okay, we have our privacy policy such and such. Are we ready? Are we set? Which advice can we give to customers who think that maybe a privacy policy is the end all and kind of the magic stamp of approval for a data privacy strategy? Yeah, that's the big question here. Is that enough?
I love that because I get it all the time. I need to be compliant. I need a policy, and then we're done. And the privacy notice is incredibly important for a variety of different reasons. And what people need to understand is it's the outward facing piece. It's one part that you do visibly share with the universe that says, here's what we do with your data. It should be accurate and actually say what you do. And then as a company, you actually have to do what you say. It's just one part. We have to really go backwards though. And it might only be the website. You could have a whole company that processes data that has nothing to do with your website. The website could be corporate marketing and you're a catalog company or you're a B2B service company and data is going backwards and forwards in other ways. It could be a software company and there's multiple sides to the privacy notice. So in those situations, you have to kind of unwind and go deep into what is actually happening with those data processes that we've been talking about so much. And then even within it, you have to go backwards. Let's just use individual rights as a really simple one. People will say, well, I put in, you email privacy@company.com. I'm good. Great. Who's going to monitor the mailbox? And when Jody submits it, what do you do? How do you make sure Jody's Jody and Jody's not Fred? And how do you go through the company? So the notice can be the checkbox, I have it, but how have we made sure we've done anything? Or if we say in it, we always ask for consent for us to email you. Well, how do you make sure the marketing team always adheres to that? Those are just a couple examples, and we all could have a lot to say here. So I could spend the whole time talking about privacy notices, but I won't. So I'd love for Sharon and Caroline to join in the party.
I completely agree. And often that's where a company wants to start. And Jody, I've had the same, right? Companies come, I just need a policy. That's all I need. And so our standard response is, I know that's what you think you need, but in order to get to that policy, we actually need to look at other things. The policy should really be, in some ways, I know they don't always want to hear it, but it should often be the last thing written because we need to actually understand what is happening inside. And often the lawyers, who are typically the ones asking for the policy, don't necessarily know what is really happening behind the scenes with data being collected, being used. Often, even the folks who are on, let's say, the web team may not always know. I mean, I think one of the areas we find surprises all the time is in the cookie section, right? No, we don't use cookies, or we only use cookies for this. And then we'll run run a search and say, well, actually, do you know you have all of these cookies and what are you using them for and how is it being done? And so I find that the creation of a policy is often just the sort of launching board into really having the deeper conversations about what are you currently doing? What do you want to be doing? And then also having a conversation around transparency, which we encourage companies to be as transparent as possible. And I know some of us on this call are lawyers, right? We were taught to hedge in all situations, but when it comes to privacy, so much of it, yes, there's a legal component, absolutely, plenty of laws, plenty of regs, but so much of it is about expectations of individuals and consumers. And so the more transparent that a company can be with those individuals, I think the more trust they can build, the fewer surprises they have. So I see the policy, the short answer to your question, Jessica, is no, that's definitely not enough. But I think it's really a tool to use to help the company understand all of the many questions and decisions it needs to make.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in just because I come at this from a very different perspective. So at ClearOps, we actually look at companies' privacy policies because we do have a vendor management tool, a monitoring tool. And so we do a lot of public data research on companies. And one of the points that we look at is privacy policies as well as cookies. And we do create that transparency around what companies are doing. And so companies do need to make sure that their privacy policies are accurate. Just some tips of advice, or tips, I guess. Make sure that it's up to date. If I see a privacy policy that's from before before GDPR went into effect, that definitely lowers my ability to trust that organization. So I think privacy policies, a lot of people sort of glance over them because they say it's a lot of text and they say things that a lot of people don't necessarily want to read. I think they're a little boring, but they're critically important because they are a window into the company's organization and how seriously they take privacy.
Which again focuses on the whole aspect of user trust and for a company. Everything ties back to that. I have another question. Maybe we can just have this one for kind of like for the end of this section of the discussion. Do we see the US going into a more of a federal data privacy legislative framework? So recently Google's been advocating for this a lot, but is this reality?
I think it's a crystal ball. And you have a lot of big tech that wants it. At the Global Privacy Conference, you had other large big technology companies like Apple and Microsoft advocating for this in the news. This week, people are saying it's kind of resurrecting in the debate for a federal privacy law. I think we'll have one in time. I truly believe it's a bit of a crystal ball or a political dart as to how quickly it will come. There's some complex issues that come up, just like the state laws. Should there be individual private right of action? Yes or no? And then the whole concept of state preemption is the other really big one. And then just quite honestly, in my opinion, you have sectoral laws. So when you go outside the US, they don't have that. You have this law and then it includes everything and you go above and beyond. Is this going to be, here's the law, but we're going to exempt the long list of everything that we already have and then keep going? Will it be a law where maybe a lot of people are saying, can we just have some common definitions? Personal information means this and have some commonality there. Eventually, but again, big crystal ball and political dart as to how soon I think we'll get there. That we're continuing to have the debate and some heavy actors trying to push for it, I think is good news for everybody.
So I am doubtful that we will have one because even on something that seemed as universally agreeable as breach notification, we weren't able to get to a federal omnibus law in the US on it. So we literally have 50 state laws on breach notification. And that's a topic that is far less controversial, right? You don't have big companies lobbying about whether or not they need to notify or not, in the same way that with the types of privacy laws we've seen recently, right, with the 4 states who have them. There are a lot of voices in discussing those laws. Companies that don't want certain terms in there, don't want certain rights, want to carve out certain types of data. So it's a much more controversial topic. And so I have trouble believing that we're going to get to enough agreement on something that is so controversial and has so many conflicting viewpoints when we didn't get there on something in privacy that was far less controversial. But I think it certainly makes for interesting conversation along the way. And I think it helps regulators and legislators and companies be more aware of the fact that these are important issues and they need to be thinking about that. And that the world and the public is watching, which I think is different from where companies were at 10 years ago, feeling like, oh, this is not that big of a deal. So that's where I see the benefit to having the discussions toward a federal law, even if I don't believe it's going to happen.
It does seem like it's very fragmented right now, and it's just very difficult in terms of lobbying and everything in the US, I think, to be able to push something such as the GDPR in Europe. But it would certainly be very relevant and very appropriate, especially for how everything is looking right now and our future looking technologies, which is where I'd like to come in and start our discussion now. So I recently read a study, and a whopping 33% of developers believe that data privacy and security are the biggest hurdles the metaverse has to overcome. That's a really large number, especially when looking at everything else on that list. And this is a study according to Agora. But before I wanted to go into that, I do want to open up the discussion, Caroline, with not only the metaverse, but all of our future looking technologies and everything, and in that entire direction that we're going, which also includes VR, as we had spoken about during our call. Where do you see the larger challenges lying? So not only, okay, it's a challenge, but let's get into it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I mean, it's sort of my soapbox right now. I mean, the first thing when you say the metaverse, I think most people will say, well, we have to define what the metaverse is, because I think a lot of us still think of it as putting on that virtual reality headset and all of a sudden being in like a game or a digital world where we have an avatar, where we're being represented as an avatar and we're experiencing almost like our physical world, but in the digital space. And there's other theories on what the metaverse is, whether it's sort of a combination between the physical and the digital, or it's the ability to, I think the one that I like the most is that there's a bunch of these sort of like digital universes and we can just move in between them. And that's why it's called a metaverse. But it does incorporate a lot of different technologies, and with it comes a lot of different issues. Some people will think of it or talk about it more as being related to blockchain technology and this whole concept of decentralization. And so when I look at that, I start breaking it down into all the different technologies we've been exposed to with the emergence of blockchain, specifically Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies and NFTs, and the security. It almost makes me laugh to say the security challenges of that, because blockchain is a technology that is based off of it's based off of security, right? The whole concept that you have this immutable ledger and that there can be no sort of it's sort of the trustless type of technology, and yet now we see ourselves faced with security challenges in the usage of that technology, specifically with NFTs and rug pulls and scams and things like that. And then I also start thinking about decentralization and DAOs and the issues of identity. And so when it comes to privacy and security, your question was, what are the sort of the overarching, maybe over the encompassing question that's going on with the emergence of this new space? And I think it is, personally, it's the need for the privacy and security community to be ahead of this versus where we traditionally have been or have been in the past, which is behind it. So proactive versus reactive. But then because, and also the concept of decentralization means that we are now all individually going to have to take control of our own data privacy and data security. And that frankly scares me a little bit, because we've barely even scratched the surface of getting companies to figure out how to take control over data privacy and data security. And so how are we now supposed to be the ones who understand how decentralized internet works in order for us to have the ability to take control over our own data privacy and data security, specifically in the blockchain? Like, what does an off-chain transaction mean? Does the data privacy afforded to me through an off-chain transaction really mean that I should be doing that versus the benefit of an on-chain transaction? These are complex issues and questions. How am I supposed to review the code of a developer who put together an NFT to know that there's not something in that NFT that's going to cause harm to me? I'm not a developer. How am I supposed to do that? These are real issues. And I think we have a long way to go. And that's why I think the privacy and security community needs to be involved now.
That question that you asked right now with the code and an NFT, that's a very valid question. What should we do about something like that? And it's not only about NFTs, but as the metaverse continues to unfold, what do we do when a person's environment suddenly has intention? Suddenly every single thing that we do, for example, we put on our VR glasses, eye tracking, it's tracking our eye movements. These are intentions that we're not even aware of. So as a user using these technologies and thinking, okay, I'm kind of exploring an entire new realm and this is going to be beneficial towards me, what can users do? Are they going to be lobbying for more data privacy legislations, contacting companies to be more transparent? What can we do as a user? And what should companies be doing?
Yeah, I mean, obviously I don't want to monopolize the whole conversation here, but I do think, my son has an Oculus headset, and he put it on when we got it for him. And I was very curious as to how this thing worked. And there's a button where you can switch the camera so that you can see where you're going while you're wearing the headset. So you can move around physically and not bump into things while you're wearing the headset. Now, if you think about that, that makes kind of logical sense from putting together, this physical sort of hardware, that you don't want people to injure themselves. And that's the purpose of that camera. But there should not be someone recording. Like, the developer who put in the technology into this physical piece of hardware should not have enabled that ability to see through the headset to record what's going on, because you may forget that you're wearing that headset, and you might, let's say, for example, go to the bathroom. Generally speaking, companies have not been able to intrude upon our bathroom habits at this point. And now we're opening up this as a new area. So what can users do? I mean, it's almost like, should the users have to be the ones who are enforcing their data privacy rights, or do we just make sure that people aren't taking that for granted from the very beginning? And again, this is where the concern is has corporate America, have companies gotten to the point where now they think of privacy by default rather than collection by default? And if it's moved to privacy by default, I have less worries about this new technology, but I don't think we're there yet. So it is worrying. And I'm also afraid of regulation being way far behind, as traditionally has been.
I think the other area to think about is, as companies want to begin using some of these cool new technologies, obviously there's the internal piece, but some of the different vendors that they will use, they don't have their privacy and security ducks in a row. And if the company just relies upon, well, they must know what they're doing, when in reality they don't, much like every vendor review that companies should be doing for all of their technologies and cool new ideas, this one's incredibly important as well, is to make sure that it's not just assumed, and people need to become familiar with these technologies and or bring in experts from the outside who can help evaluate those.
And that I think is extremely relevant when we're looking at technologies, for example, Horizon Workrooms. That is going to be merging different technologies that companies already use internally for communication, Slack, etc. And when these technologies start being observed in a manner, okay, when our voices are being detected, when employers are saying, okay, this person is this excited about work or not, just due to the voice, this is when things start to get scary. How much can we actually track and see where people don't even know about what's being tracked? So a privacy policy is stating, okay, this is what we're going to be doing with your data. This is exactly where we're giving it to and the terms and conditions and what we're using it for. But when people, you and I, don't even know what these technologies are doing, that's exactly when it gets scary. And Caroline, you talk a lot about the concept of identity, data privacy identity, and identity in the metaverse, and kind of using identity to protect one's own privacy. Can you elaborate a little bit more for our users and our viewers right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very excited about the idea that in the metaverse you can have multiple identities. Now, of course, you have to manage them, but the idea that maybe you can create an avatar that is not in any way representative of your physical appearance, but maybe perhaps the way you would like to appear, and maybe it's completely different gender or anything, right? It can be literally anything. You have freedom in expressing your identity in a way that the physical world limits you. And I think that is very exciting. And I also think there are possibilities for there to be true anonymity online. You know, I think there's some technical hurdles, of course, but there's opportunities there that are different from where they are today in the physical world. And then, of course, there's the reverse is true, just to what you just said. You know, it's funny because you said, I've lost the quote that you just said, but something about how this new technology is very scary in terms of what it can determine about us. But also, the technology is scary for the sake of the technology, right? I mean, if you have your voice being analyzed, who's to say that the data that was used to create the analysis was correct? So, you know, maybe the data is saying that your voice is indicating that you're nervous, when in reality, it's indicating that you're excited. And because of the context in which that was applied, that actually makes a very significant difference in how that data is being used. I mean, I don't like to always talk about the fear. I think there's a lot of great potential in the metaverse and the concept of decentralization and self-sovereignty, and the possibilities with using identity in a totally new way that might be create a lot of freedom for people. But I do also worry that if we don't have the thought put into the room from the beginning, privacy by design from the very beginning, that we could also unfortunately land into the dystopia that we're all scared of.
You know what, what strikes me when you're speaking, Caroline, is that so much of what you're saying, if we had just taken out the term metaverse here and replaced it with smart devices, this would have been the same conversation we would have had, I don't know, time is a blur right now, 5 years ago. It's hard for me to remember when that all started, but you know, listening devices in your home, cameras at your door that show pictures of what's happening outside. There are many benefits to some of these things, right? But there's also the opportunity for some of that, as you say, dystopian uses and reality, where consumers may not understand the full range of what is occurring, either because they don't read the privacy policy or because it's not clear. There may be uses that are happening that are more nefarious, that again were not identified. So an individual didn't have the opportunity to really think about, am I really consenting to this? Do I want this company who's putting this cool device in my house that I like because it allows me to ask what time it is from anywhere in the room, for example, or what the weather will be? Are they analyzing my voice? Is there AI that's being used for that? What bias is in that AI that is making certain determinations? And while, as with all technologies, there are the opportunities for increase convenience and efficiency and some amazing things, right? Better research, more efficient research, things like that for healthcare. There are many great uses. And there are these opportunities for misuse or just use that's not transparent to the individual. And so I think while we talk about the metaverse today, and we talked about smart home and smart devices a few years ago, it's interesting to me that the conversations we're raising the same issues.
And I think that with these issues, having spoken with Justin Brookman, for example, last 2 weeks ago on a Tech That talks exactly about that, smart devices, children's privacy. I mean, we see right now that regulations in the US are really waking up when it comes to children's data privacy legislations. And that is an issue. That is an issue, especially for smart devices. That is an issue when we saw exactly, we did not know where these technologies would be taking us when we're looking at smart TVs and everything. And it was very easy for companies to establish dark patterns with how they collected data. And I think that these dark patterns are being also seen in virtual reality and the metaverse. It's just a little bit scarier because there's a lot more that can be done with our data if it's not data for good. Of course, with healthcare data and AI recognition for different applications, we're doing a lot of great things. And that cannot be undermined and that cannot be forgotten, but we do need to emphasize the fact that there must be a transparency. And without transparency, that's when things can get scary.
Yeah, I mean, I think I always say it's a human thing, right? I mean, if you are someone who's responsible for developing this technology, don't forget how you would feel if your data was tracked. I mean, it's not that hard, you know, we're talking about a human right that we all have opinions about. So the idea that you're just doing this, that it's a company that's, you know, being a bad actor is not really true. It's just that there's some sort of misalignment on someone who's sitting there responsible for the work, thinking about it in terms of themselves versus what the business, you know, that's this amorphous like company needs. But I agree with you, Sharon, that it was only 5 years ago we were talking about this with smart devices. Unfortunately, we didn't jump in and do something about it, you know,
Right.
and maybe this time we can actually, maybe this time we could actually do something about it versus just sort of dancing around and having discussions about the topic.
And I don't think we exactly solved for smart devices. I think that's still an issue. And you could take any new emerging technology and make that be an issue. There's drones, we just kind of keep repeating, and we could even be talking about social media and what happened 20 years ago when it first came on the scene and where we are. So it just continues to evolve.
It does. Let's see, it's exciting times. Let's see where everything goes. We have about a couple minutes left, and I have some questions from our audience. So if anyone else has any more questions, please feel free to ask. We have our first question. What are the basic regulations to look at when it comes to data privacy regulations?
Well, I think that kind of depends on where the company is located, and you have a bit of the technical requirements versus based on where you are and the size of your organization, for example. But some of the common ones is GDPR in the EU. For in the United States, we have really the ones that Sharon mentioned at the beginning of our talk: CCPA/CPRA for California, VCDPA for Virginia, CPA for Colorado, UCPA for Utah. Just put together some letters and it'll probably be a privacy law. Then, of course, you have healthcare. So that's HIPAA for specific healthcare data, not all health data. And so I think it kind of depends. I'm sure any of us would be happy to answer that question in slightly more detail. And then you might even have like Jody in Georgia, who might not have customers in any of those jurisdictions. I might have to make sure I'm adhering to what the Federal Trade Commission would expect. So it might
especially
not,
with children's data privacy, right?
well, you have that, but even just old-fashioned, have a privacy notice on your website that just discloses what you're doing. Under the unfair and deceptive practices piece of the Federal Trade Commission, they just expect that if you're collecting data, you have a privacy notice that says what you're doing with it. And very small companies have not done that and gotten into trouble. So it kind of depends, I think, a little bit of where you are. If you have customers in Canada, there's a variety of different laws up there. Brazil, we could kind of keep going. So step number one, I'd say, is where are you? Step number two, figure out where you are and if there are any requirements under each of those, and figure out if you're in scope. If you are not in scope, you're like exempt, then I think you have to decide, do you want to stay that way, and what do your customers expect of you?
Thank you very much. I know the IPP also has a really thorough map of all the legislation specific to California, and kind of seeing where the timeline is, what we're looking at, what's already been passed, and where things are going. So the IPP is a really great source for all of the data privacy legislations nationwide. I have another question here from Fabian. What are the most important technologies in the context of Web 3.0 to foster trust in B2C and B2B data sharing scenarios?
I mean, I'm trying to unpack that question, because what are the important parts of Web 3.0 just to foster trust? I mean, I think a lot of the part of 3.0 is because it's decentralized, that it's almost trying to get to more of a trustless environment. So you don't need necessarily to have to trust, you know, like a Facebook, for example, because there's no such thing as a Facebook. There's no centralized platform that's collecting all this type of data. And I would say, to go to the utopian context of Web 3.0, it's even that now, as a consumer, as a data subject, I have my data under my complete control, and I now know, using maybe blockchain technology, who it's being shared with. And I have this now in an immutable ledger, so I can track where my data is going and who's having access to it, and I can control that. So I think that is, I think, probably the best answer to that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. And what are basic small businesses, or so what about what basic small businesses pay attention to when it comes to data protection? This is kind of like what we talked about a little bit earlier, how small businesses also need to focus on every single legislation in place for data privacy. Or what can you answer? Would anyone like to answer to
that? I mean, I think the first thing is really understanding what it is you're collecting or planning to, and how you want to use it, and make that a conscious decision, not a passive one where you have technologies that are just gathering data because it's sort of a US pastime to gather as much data as we can. And so I would say for small businesses to really think about how it is that they want to be collecting data, which data and for which purposes, and then be really transparent about it in their policy and in their uses. That's the first place to start, in addition to the broader answer of, and look at all of the laws that are relevant, but it needs to start with just the gathering the facts and the goal.
And also kind of like fine-tuning your business strategy and marketing strategy according to what kind of data you're going to be producing. Also, I've spoken to a lot of people who say, okay, clean up the data that you collect. You don't actually need to collect everything that you are collecting, and just kind of do like a general cleanup. Well, it's 1 minute past our time. So Sharon, Caroline, and Jody, thank you so much for being today on our All Women's Data Privacy panel. I'm glad we discussed all the topics that we did today, and I look forward to seeing everyone on our next Tech That Talks. We're going to be focusing a little bit more on children's privacy, and having an organization that specifically focuses on this, which is quite interesting. So thank you so much. I hope everyone has a nice day, and see you again.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.